Good morning. My name is Ed Scott, and on behalf of First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, Delaware, I welcome you to our online service. Also, I extend an invitation to you to join us after this morning's service for an informal coffee virtual cafe. This is a welcoming congregation, and this morning, I'm using a statement from Howard Thurman as a reminder to us all. Community cannot feed for long on itself. It can only flourish where always the boundaries are giving way to the coming of others from beyond them, unknown and undiscovered brothers. May we so flourish together. And now, let us prepare our whole selves for this morning's worship.
Good morning. I'm the Reverend Larry Piers, minister of First Unitarian Church of Wilmington. I'm so glad that you were able to join us for our online service this morning. The focus of our service is the resilient soul of Howard Thurman. We will be drawing upon many of his writings as we proceed with this service, including these words, which are our call to worship this morning. There is something in every one of you that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. It is the only true guide you will ever have. And if you cannot hear it, you will all of your life spend your days on the ends of strings that somebody else pulls.
If you have a chalice at home, I invite you to join us by lighting it. And this morning, as we light our chalice, hear the words of Reverend Sarah Eileen Lawal. Out of the flames of fear, we rise with courage of our deepest convictions to stand for justice, inclusion, and peace. And out of the flames of scrutiny, we rise to proclaim our faith with hope to heal a fractured and hurting world. Out of the flames of doubt, we rise to embrace the mystery, wonder, and awe of all there is and all that is yet to be. And out of the flames of hate, we rise with a force of love, love that celebrates our shared humanity. Out of the flames, we rise.
Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned. Circle for release. Circle for the planet, circle for each soul, for the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned. Circle for release. Circle for the planet. Circle for each soul. For the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. Circle round for freedom. Circle round for peace. For all of us imprisoned. Circle for release. Circle for the planet. Circle for each soul. For the children of our children. Keep the circle whole.
Please join me in affirming our mission. First Unitarian Church of Wilmington is a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirits, fights injustice, and transforms the world through loving action.
Today I am sharing a story from the Buddhist and Hindu traditions called Indra's magnificent jeweled net. Far, far away, in the abode of the great god Indra, king of heaven, hangs a wondrous, vast net, much like a spider's web in intricacy and loveliness. It stretches out indefinitely in all directions. At each node or crossing point of the net hangs a single glittering jewel. Since the net itself is infinite in dimension, the jewels are infinite in number. The sparkling jewels hang there, suspended and supported by the net, glittering like stars, dazzling to behold. Close your eyes now and imagine what this magnificent jeweled net looks like, spread across the vast expanse of space. Now, keep your eyes closed and move in close to one jewel in the net. Look closely, and you will see that the polished surface of the gem reflects all the other jewels in the net, infinite in number. Just as two mirrors placed opposite each other reflect an image ad infinitum. Each jewel reflected in this gem you are gazing into also reflects all the other jewels, so that the process of reflection is itself infinite. Now, open your eyes and know that you are a sparkling jewel in Indra's net, as is every person around you. Every jewel is connected with all the other jewels in the net. Every person is intimately connected with all the other persons in the universe. Each has an independent place within the net, and we all reflect and influence each other. A change in one jewel or person produces a change, however slight, in every other. In addition, whatever you do to one jewel affects the entire net as well as yourself. You cannot damage one strand of a spider web without injuring the entire web. And you cannot damage one strand of the web that is the universe without injuring all others in it, whether that injury is known or unknown to them. This can work for good or ill because, of course, just as destructive acts affect the entire net, so do loving, constructive, compassionate acts affect the entire net. A single helpful act, even a simple act of kindness, will send positive ripples across the infinite net, touching every jewel, every person in existence. I wonder what loving, constructive, and compassionate acts have affected you in this net. I wonder how you are affecting the entire net.
Let us stay with the image that Catherine just offered us of Indra's net and sense the deep connection that we have with all of life and with one another, the impact that our loving action and care can have on those that we are so deeply connected to, even when we don't realize it. Let's prepare ourselves for this time of prayerful meditation. Perhaps you can find a steady posture, allowing the chair that you're sitting in to really hold you and support you. And perhaps your feet are caressing the earth as the earth caresses your feet. And you feel the support in your own posture for this time of centering down. This meditation is drawn from the work of Howard Thurman. how good it is to center down. To sit quietly and see one's self pass by. The streets of our minds seethe with endless traffic. Our spirits resound with clashes, with noisy silences, while something deep within hungers and thirsts for the still moment and the resting lull. With full intensity we seek, ere the quiet passes, a fresh sense of order in our living, a direction, a strong, sure purpose that will structure our confusion and bring meaning in our chaos. We look at ourselves in this waiting moment, the kinds of people we are. The questions persist. What are we doing with our lives? What are the motives that order our days? What is the end of our doings? Where are we trying to go? Where do we put the emphasis? And where are our values focused? For what end do we make sacrifices? Where is my treasure? And what do I love most in life? What do I hate most in life? And to what am I true? Over and over, it's questions like these that beat in upon the waiting moment. As we listen, floating up through all the jangling echoes of our turbulence, there is a sound of another kind, a deeper note, which only the stillness of the heart makes clear. It moves directly to the core of our being. Our questions are answered, our spirits refreshed, and we move back into the traffic of our daily round with the peace of the eternal in our step. How good it is to center down. May we continue this meditation in the shared silence that now follows. From each time that we gather, life happens to us. Sometimes we have moments of celebration, and sometimes we have moments of care and of concern. Let's attend to our own individual heart in this time, and also let us open ourselves up to the collective heart of our own community. As we state out loud at home, or write in the chat, or even just in the silence of our own heart, the concerns that we carry and the joys that we celebrate. You may write those names in the chat now if you would like. May all whose names were spoken and those unspoken, may all those whose names were written in the chat find peace and healing this day. Thank you, Kathy, for that wonderful music. It's great to hear it. How good it is to center down, to sit quietly and see oneself pass by. The streets of our minds seethe with endless traffic. Our spirits resound with clashing and with noisy silences, while something deep within hungers and thirsts for the still moment and the resting lull. These words from the meditation by Howard Thurman confirm to me his enduring relevance to us now. I repeated his words to demonstrate this relevance. Here is a man that speaks to that part of us that knows we must center down. Here is one who speaks to our busyness, not just in our activities, but also our busyness within. Here is a man who has a message for any of us that are seeking more grounding in our life. Here is a man who was not defined by the circumstances of his life, but was propelled by them into being a particular presence in the world. That we show up in all the context of our lives matters, yet how we show up matters even more. That's the message I get from Howard Thurman. And this morning I will offer some glimpses from Thurman's life and thought as a way for us to also reflect back on ourselves. Even while speaking during the civil rights era, when there was a rising resistance to the generations and generations of racial injustices in this country, Thurman still said, even to the activist, it is good to center down. For Thurman knew in his bones that from a centering place, protest could have the potential to not just be a political force, but a soul force as well. He fostered a soul force that spoke to the surface of things from the place of depth. You might recall last month in my sermon about the spiritual life of Martin Luther King Jr. that it was Howard Thurman who showed up at King's bedside in the hospital, urging King to take some time away before jumping back into the fray. As it turns out, Howard Thurman was and continues to still be a unique wisdom figure and spiritual guide to people of many faiths. Interestingly enough, he speaks to those of both a mystical sentiment and a passion for social justice. He speaks to those who hunger for the holy and those who hunger for justice, and he gives reasons to us to care for both. That's why I'm inviting Thurman into our midst this morning, because I do believe that we too at First Unitarian Church of Wilmington are a community that hungers for the holy and also hungers for justice. Howard Thurman's unique perspectives on the connection between the inner life and what he called the social order was forged within his own lived experience. Let's think about it. Thurman lived from 1900 until 1981. The times in which he lived, of course, meant that as an African American man, he was born in very oppressive circumstances. In this case, for example, he was born in a segregated town in Daytona, Florida, which meant that he had to leave home to attend high school, since there were no high schools for blacks in his town at the time. Although considered one of the greatest spiritual resources in this nation, many have not heard of him. Well, since I attended Boston University School of Theology, where Thurman had been there decades before as Dean of Marsh Chapel at Boston University, I got introduced to Thurman as a religious thinker, a social activist, and a spiritual guide. I learned that he was a mentor to many of his contemporary figures in the civil rights movement. In addition to Martin Luther King Jr., these included James Farmer, Marion Wright Edelman, Jesse Jackson, and later included such people as Barack Obama. Alice Walker was inspired by Thurman when, as a young college student at Spelman College, where Thurman was chaplain at the time, she was required to attend chapel each morning, even if it meant that she'd tuck her pajamas into her shoes to get there on time. She loved it when the preacher was Howard Thurman. As she describes it, he spoke to us of a heaven that was not a room with a closed door, but a heaven that was so vast that all things inhabit it. Our ancestors, our rivers, our world, and heaven was even included within us. From those chapel service talks, Alice Walker and her friends would then go to marches and sit-ins in the streets of Atlanta. Howard Thurman then is a wisdom figure as well to many of us today who seek to find some anchoring guidance that speaks both to our soul and to our care for the world. Beyond the divisions that we usually construct between the personal spiritual life and social action, between the personal growth and social transformation, Thurman provides, I feel, an integral, holistic perspective that doesn't manufacture such divisions. Thurman asserted it in this way: always, against all that fragments and shatters, and against all things that separate and divide within and without, life labors to meld together into a single harmony. Thurman went from a humble, oppressive beginning to find new spiritual pathways relevant to the spiritual and the social conditions of his time. After going to India and studying nonviolent resistance from Mahatma Gandhi, he introduced countless others to this way of being and acting in the midst of the social turmoil in the civil rights movement of the 50s and the 60s. Thurman's own religious guide actually was his maternal grandmother, who he writes about in his own writings. Her name was Nancy Ambrose. And he says, her wisdom and disciplined spirituality nurtured him while he was with her and in memory of her for many years onward. It was that same grandmother who confronted the pastor of the Baptist church in town who did not want to have Thurman's father's funeral in his church. Thurman's father read such books by Robert Ingersoll and humanist and atheist thinkers, in addition to a wide range of literature. And it was because Thurman's father was known for his free thought in matters of religion, the pastor did not want to do the funeral there, but the grandmother insisted, and it happened. Thurman was nurtured by the dynamics of the church and the black community in Daytona, Florida, and although he traveled far from there, these were his enduring roots. One scholar gives us a sense of the wide expanse from which Thurman drew. He writes that Howard Thurman took the 19th century tradition of Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Theodore Parker, Margaret Fuller, and others of universalist religious exploration and added to them his deep background in African American experience and Quaker-influenced mysticism, and brought this to his personal understanding of all the ravages and brutalities of the social order inflicted on black people in American society. Thurman drew from many sources, but he had a unique voice and perspective to offer. Yet underlying all the sources that Thurman drew from, there was another current in his life from early on in his life. That current is what many of us know as a mystical sensibility. That mystical sensibility can be like an underground stream within us that may first have found us, but then we continue to find ways to remember, to bask, and to bathe in the experiences ever so subtly throughout our life. The mystic sensibility gives us a vantage point in which to see life within a broader perspective, a more extensive rhythm, and to be attuned to a silent pulse within. Thurman tells of his personal experiences in his early childhood in this way. He writes, as a boy in Florida, I walked along the beach of the Atlantic in the quiet stillness. I held my breath against the night and watched the stars etch their brightness on the face of the darkened canopy of the heavens. I had the sense that all things, the sand, the sea, the night, and I, were one lung through which all of life breathed. It's glimpses like this, glimpses of much more than our own simple mental maps of the world, that are revealed to us in various ways in nature and art and personal experience, through love, through solitude, through prayer, or in work on behalf or in solidarity with those who are poor, oppressed, or denied their human dignity, that we have that sense of something more, something greater that moves us and moves through us. So I believe that for Thurman, it was these kinds of experiences that were the things that actually anchored him during some of the turbulent, troubling, and terrifying times in which he lived and ministered and taught. It was this kind of sensitivity that allowed him to appreciate the many and differing paths through which people related to the divine, the holy, or the most meaningful things in their own lives. Here's one story that I think gives us a kind of a glimpse of Thurman's somewhat quiet persistence. Early in his career in 1955, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomי decided with some hesitation to attend a program at Boston University in the psychology of religion. Since Reb Zellman, as he was called, was an Orthodox Jew, he was accustomed to doing his morning prayers as close to sunrise as possible. So he lived some distance from the school in the South Shore of Boston. And in order to arrive on time for his class, he did his prayers at the school. Now, he couldn't find a place that was open that early in the morning except a room in the basement of the chapel, one of the rooms in that building that did not have a lot of Christian images. He did this several mornings until one day a middle-aged black man said to him as he was rushing out for his 8 a.m. class, "I've seen you here several times. Wouldn't you like to say your prayers in the small chapel?" While Reb Zellman was trying to figure out what to say to this man and afraid to offend him by saying anything about the big silver cross on the chapel altar, the man said, "Why don't you stop by the chapel tomorrow morning and take a look?" When Reb Zellman arrived in the chapel the next day, he found that the cross had been removed, and in their place were 2 candles burning in brass candlesticks with a giant Bible between them, open to the Psalm 139. "Whither shall I flee from thy presence?" Reb Zellman later discovered, you guessed it, that middle-aged black man was actually Howard Thurman, the dean of the chapel. This story, I believe, captures some of the spirit of Thurman. Throughout his life, he kept drawing a wider circle that included and embraced rather than dissected or divided human experience. He found what was universal and connecting in human experience rather than only emphasizing differences. Likewise, I think as Unitarian Universalists now, our religious task is to discover what is universal and connecting among us and in those in our wider community rather than overemphasizing difference or our own uniqueness. This was most evident when Thurman decided to follow a dream of creating a religious fellowship that would, in his words, open its life to all seekers of all colors and creeds. That dream was actually realized when he moved to San Francisco and he co-founded the Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples in 1944, the first of its kind at the time. He served there for 9 years. The congregation has had some rocky years along the way, and yet it still exists to this day. It's been served by Unitarian Universalist clergy and clergy of other traditions over the years. Today, the congregation has, 75 years later or so, defines itself in this way. The Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples is an interfaith, interracial, intercultural community of seekers dedicated to personal empowerment and social transformation through an ever-deepening relationship with the Spirit of God in all life. I sense the imprint that still exists there from Howard Thurman's teachings and personality. I share his history with you to give you a sense that Thurman's life was propelled by purpose, anchored by a mystic vision, and engaged fully in experimenting and encouraging social change. I share these stories with you because I believe that they demonstrate what it could mean to keep drawing the circle wide and then drawing it wider still, as a favorite hymn says. Barbara Brown Taylor, a religious writer, Episcopal priest, and teacher, wrote recently of Thurman, "Everything he said, wrote, taught, and did flowed from a single course, which was his direct and incontrovertible encounter with the divine. That was how he discovered the really real, which funded his courage to challenge the unreal in all of its guises: unjustness, unkindness, unreconciliation, and unfreedom. Therefore, I believe we can come to understand that Thurman's contemplative life fed his social activism. This intersection between social action and mysticism was so integral to Thurman that he wrote, "Every living thing belongs to every other living thing, and I can never be what I ought to be until the last living manifestation of life is what it ought to be. For better or worse, I am tied into the idiom of everything that lives. And if I forget this, I profane God's creation. If I remember it, I come to myself in you, and you come into yourself in me." Thurman's teachings inspire me, his way of giving expression to what oftentimes is hard to express. Thurman inspires me because he kept on moving forward when there could have been so many reasons for him to give up, to relinquish hope, and to limit his possibilities. Thurman, I believe, was a resilient soul, an example of breaking down barriers through a tireless spirit and through what Gandhi would call a soul force. Now, some found it hard to appreciate the fullness of his soul and how mysticism and social action for him were intricately connected. He often did a sermon series on this connection, and once when Thurman met a group of young black activists during the rise of the civil rights movement, they said afterwards, "We thought we were meeting with an activist, and we found out he's a mystic." They had some disappointment in that encounter. Yet others knew that Thurman was both a mystic and a social activist, social prophet. Thurman understood that indeed no one was an island. He taught us that all of us were part of a social organism, that whenever human beings lost their responsibility for the social world, this had an impact on their own well-being as well. He taught we are all tied together in one bundle. What meets the deepest need in me must also meet the other's deepest needs. We are one of another. Sounds a lot like Indra's net. This was Thurman's grounding statement, and it anchored him during times of personal or social turmoil. This week, I invite us to reflect upon and share, what is our grounding statement? What is it that anchors each of us and how we are in the world and or what we do in the world? Can we find some time this week, maybe on a file card or a Post-it note or a file on your computer, and begin to compose our own grounding and anchoring statement? Maybe for some of us, having a conversation with someone or a walk with someone would be the best way to begin to articulate your own personal grounding or anchoring statement. Thurman's statement articulated for him the why behind what he did and why he put his energy into the efforts that he did. Now that I've given you an assignment, the good students among us will want to hear Thurman's statement again, just to kind of give them some form to think about. So I'll read that one again. Thurman's statement is, we are all tied together in one bundle. What meets the deepest need in me must also meet the other's deepest need. We are one of another. Notice it's only 3 sentences. Notice how simple and direct it is. Perhaps you might find or already have some sense of your own grounding and anchoring statement for what it is that you do and how it is that you are in the world. One commentator on Thurman's life put it this way: Thurman spoke to our fragmentation and spiritual hunger and lack of connectedness and relatedness. He spoke to our busyness, our internal noise, and our need to center down. Standing in the midst of his idiom and reaching out to other idioms, Christian and Jewish, Hindu and Buddhist, African, Asian, Indian, and European, he spoke to this crisis by calling us to the task of spiritual reconstruction. I believe that Howard Thurman is a spiritual guide that deserves to be cherished and known more among us as Unitarian Universalists and among those of various life and spiritual persuasions. He has something relevant to say to us when we want to draw a dividing line between spirituality and social action. He illuminates our understanding that our hunger for the holy and our hunger for justice are both important. Each can fuel each other. If we take a moment now, we can use our breath as an example of this connection. Our in-breath can represent our connection to our own inner life or soul. Our out-breath can represent how we express our concern for the world. Let's give that a try. Let's try it for a moment. As I breathe in, I connect to my own inner life. I attend to my soul. As I breathe out, I express my care for the world around me. As I breathe in, I connect to my own inner life. As I breathe out, I express my care for the world around me. Our breath is indivisible. So is our spiritual quest and our quest for social justice and compassion. So it's good to center down. It's good to find an anchor and to periodically ask ourselves, to what is my life committed? So you have your assignments for the week, right? I believe that Howard Thurman deserves the final word, therefore, in this sermon. He offers us this enduring wisdom in the quietness of this place, surrounded by the all-pervading presence of God. My heart whispers, keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve, that in fair weather or in foul, in good times or in tempest, in the days when the darkness and the foe are nameless or familiar, I may not forget that to which my life is committed. Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve.
On the road Hear the song of peace within you. Hear the song of peace in your heart. Each reading will lead to harvest. Love and lions for our way.
This year's stewardship campaign is underway, and we wanted to share with you why we pledged to First U.
We support First U Wilmington in every way we can because we need this community and because this community needs us.
We need this community because it encourages us as we seek our truth. It challenges us to live our values. It inspires us to go beyond what is comfortable.
And this community needs us to give voice to our principles in the larger community and world, to show love and acceptance to all, to speak and work for justice that honors the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
We pledge because our actions show what we value. We pledge because this community needs to know what resources it can count on to carry out its mission. We pledge because we are committed to this community at First U of Wilmington.
As you consider your pledge this year, ask yourself what First U is worth to you. How does it support you and your values? How can your pledge help this community put those values into action?
Now, this morning, there are 3 ways listed on the screen that you can give your offering. You can mail a check to the church office on Halstead Road. You can go to the church website and find the link for Donate Now. Or you can use the Vanco app on your smart device and make your contribution there. Now, please join me in dedicating this morning's offering to the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action. We dedicate our lives, and these are offerings.
Lift Every Voice and Sing was written by James Weldon Johnson and J. Rosamond Johnson in 1900. James Weldon Johnson had planned to write a poem about Abraham Lincoln to commemorate the 91st anniversary of his birth, but instead, due to the ongoing civil rights movement, chose to write a piece about the struggles and the progress of Black Americans, not quite 40 years out of bondage. The completed work was performed on February 12th by 500 elementary school students in Jacksonville, Florida, and would soon sweep the nation. Due to the popularity of the song, which was now making its way into church hymnals, the NAACP in 1919 dubbed it the Negro National Anthem. Now, that distinction has met with some controversy over the years, most recently when the NFL chose to use it in its game broadcasts. Now, for me, I can understand and follow the different arguments that people want to make, but those arguments to me matter very little. The NAACP distinction is in no way official. James Weldon Johnson did not set out to write a national anthem, and like Francis Scott Key, he simply set out to write a poem. There's nothing political or offensive in the Johnson's work. I believe there is no implied restriction on who can or should sing the song. And by design or by happenstance, Johnson makes no direct reference to race in any of the 3 stanzas of his poem. In the end, it's a song, a beautiful and powerful song, and as such, should be sung by anybody who identifies with this message and wants to share it. If anything, by labeling it the Negro National Anthem, the NAACP focused a light on this tremendous work and made it a source of comfort, assurance, and pride for a people who needed it for 100 plus years and counting. James Weldon Johnson and his younger brother both had monumental careers. James Weldon Johnson would be the first black lawyer to enter the Florida bar. He was appointed consul to Venezuela and then Nicaragua. He was a professor at Fisk University and the first black professor at New York University, and he'd go on to be the first executive director of the NAACP. J. Rosamond Johnson was a very successful songwriter and performer of musical theater and operetta in both the United States and England. He also collected and published anthologies of both Negro spirituals and American folk songs. He performed the role Lawyer Frazier in the very first production of Porgy and Bess, and with the film Emperor Jones, starring Paul Robeson, he created the first film score by an African American. So both men were prominent contributors to the Harlem Renaissance, but it is Lift Every Voice and Sing for which they will forever be remembered. I recently had the opportunity to go into a studio with Dr. Tedrin Blair Lindsay of the University of Kentucky, and we worked on an impromptu arrangement of Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise, high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the darkness has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun, let us march on till victory's won. Slowly the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with the steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place which was our father's side. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading a path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. Our silent tears, thou hast brought us thus far on the way. Thou hast by thy might led us into the light. Keep us forever in the path we
Before I offer the closing words for our service this morning, I want to remind you that today, immediately after the service, there will be a virtual coffee hour, a virtual cafe, I should say. Doesn't have to be an hour. It will be like a coffee hour in the sense that there's no program except connecting with one another on Zoom. That link was sent out from the AV team yesterday. You might find it in your inbox if you need to look for it. This might be a great opportunity to draft your grounding statement or your anchoring statement with some other captive audience in your midst. Who knows? But anyway, let me offer these words, which I think succinctly capture some of Howard Thurman's perspective. Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive.
As we extinguish the chapel this morning, I ask you to listen now to these additional words from Howard Thurman. There is a quiet courage that comes from an inward spring of confidence in the meaning and significance of life. Such courage is an underground river flowing far beneath the shifting events of one's experience, keeping alive 1,000 little springs of action. Friends, may you know those springs of action.
I'm climbing up the mountain, children, gotta reach my heavenly home. I'm climbing up and working harder, Lord, don't ever leave me alone. Can't you see I'm trying to make it each day, even though trials pass my way? I'm gonna keep on climbing up the mountain till I make it on home. Won't you help me? Won't you help me? 'Cause the road is rough, the mountain is steep, and the going gets tough. But when I see him face to face, I'm gonna shout all over the place. I'm climbing up the mountain, children, gotta reach my heavenly home. I'm climbing up and working harder, Lord, don't ever leave me alone. Can't you see I'm trying to make it each day, even though trials pass my way? I'm gonna keep on climbing up the mountain till I make it on home. Oh, sister, won't you help me? Won't you help me to carry the load over the hard and rocky road? But when I arrive, wipe my tears away. It's gonna be a happy day, a happy day. I'm climbing up the mountain, children, gonna reach my heavenly home. I'm climbing up and working harder, Lord, don't ever leave me alone. Can't you see I'm trying to make it each day, even though trials pass my way? I'm gonna keep on climbing up the mountain till I make it on home. Gonna keep on climbing up the mountain. I'm gonna keep on climbing.